This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 620 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. We finally got more information about these prospects. The NFL Combine happened this past week. I've mentioned before that my prospect models don't care that much about the Combine, and that's true. But number one, that could largely be due to the fact that the models include draft capital. So if a player tests really well, there's always a chance that a team likes him more, and he gets better draft capital. Number two, speed score or weight adjusted 40 time, that is an input in my running back model. It's more of a threshold thing than me caring about a player being really athletic though. More on that later. And then number three, I do care about height and weight measurements. In the model, the height and weight that's listed for each player is from the Combine. It's always good to get that uniform data. So because of those reasons, I care about the Combine. I still lead with college production, and I still care about other factors more because my models do. But the Combine is far from irrelevant in my process. So today I'm going to talk through winners and losers from the Combine with a focus on the running back and wide receiver positions, the two most important positions in fantasy football. Now, before getting to the winners and losers, I just want to send a reminder that there's no better time than today to sign up for FanDuel Fantasy. For users who have yet to make a deposit on FanDuel Fantasy, you can deposit today to receive 2 free entries. All you have to do is deposit a minimum of $10 into your FanDuel DFS account, and you'll be instantly rewarded with 2 free vouchers. This is a limited time offer, so be sure to deposit now and play for free. Head over to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel Fantasy app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. And one more thing before getting into things. Are you ready for March Madness? If so, my friend and trusted analyst Ed Fang wrote the book on how to win your pool. And his daily podcast series, Bracket Wisdom, will get you ready to crush your pool. Check out the Bracket Wisdom series, which appears on the Football Analytics Show podcast. Ed's insights have been huge for me in the past, and I'm sure they're going to come through big time once again this year. So definitely check out his March Madness podcast series, Bracket Wisdom, which appears on the Football Analytics Show. So now let's talk about the Combine winners and losers. I won't be able to get to every single winner and loser on today's show because there are a lot of prospects, but I wanted to call out and focus on the important ones. And I'll also be honest with you. I've got a lot more winners this year than losers. That's obviously a really good thing if you have 2022 rookie picks. This class in total looks better for me each day. And they really slayed the Combine. But on today's show, I've got 9 winners that I want to talk about and then 3 losers. That's how good of a showing they had. But let's start with the winners. And I'll give a shout out to my top running back in this year's class, Breece Hall. Like I said at the top, weight adjusted 40 times don't matter in the model from the standpoint of ceiling. It's more so to make sure a player has a floor. They need to hit a speed score of 90, which the majority of running backs are going to do. Some didn't this year, and I'll get to that later. But Breece Hall had the second best speed score among running backs who ran the 40 at the Combine. That's combined with a production profile that's great across the board. And he also weighed in at 217 pounds. Now this is a preview of the Late Round Prospect Guide, which drops on March 14th. Go order it now on lateround.com. But Breece Hall's top statistical comparables are Rashad Penny, Dalvin Cook, and Ezekiel Elliott. He looks like he could be a stud at the next level, and the Combine helps show that. The same can be said about Kenneth Walker. I've shared my concerns about Walker's profile already on this show. He has a bad receiving profile. That's at least a reason for concern. The good news is that Walker makes up for it elsewhere. He looked like a natural pass catcher during Combine drills, and he came through with a speed score that was close to Hall's. I know a lot of people probably think that I'm just going to avoid Kenneth Walker this year, because I pointed out that he is receiving red flags. But that's not necessarily true. He is and has always been my RB3. He's about 7 or 8 percentile spots below Breece Hall and Isaiah Spiller in my prospect model. And it's because of his lack of receiving numbers. But where Walker's at, we've seen plenty of hits in the past. Now with Walker, I will say finding comps for him is really tough. He's almost like a smaller Nick Chubb. But he also comps favorably to Trey Mason, which obviously is not a good comp. But he's my RB3, and the Combine just confirmed that. The combine result that I was maybe most excited to see at running back this year was Rachaad White's. I talked about White having a pretty complete profile last week on the show. But one of the issues with him was that he was listed at 6'2", 210 pounds in college. When you watch him, he does look a little bit leaner than some backs, but at the combine, he weighed in at 214 pounds and he was 6 feet flat. So his BMI was a lot better than what I had originally thought. He also ran a good 40 and had a good speed score, so that helps. My model really likes Rachaad White. He may not get the draft capital that we really want, but hopefully he can be a day 2 pick. I tweeted this out over the weekend, but the top comp for White in the model is David Johnson. And some of his other comparables are not bad in Jay Ajayi and Tevin Coleman. He's someone that I'm very into right now. There was also James Cook, Dalvin's brother. I talked on the running back studs episode from last week how Cook had some real concerns to his production profile. He split a backfield in college and his touchdown share and his yards per team play numbers, they were pretty low. But he had a good receiving profile because he was a receiving back for Georgia. We knew he was a little bit leaner in frame, but he weighed in 5 to 10 pounds heavier than what I expected. He was 199 pounds. And then he gave us a well above average speed score. Now, he still doesn't have the best comps in the world within my model, but I do think that Cook was a winner because some of his size concerns were sort of kind of pushed aside. He at least doesn't need to be as big of an outlier anymore. And then the last running back that I want to talk about on the winner's side is Pierre Strong. Strong is coming from a smaller program, and he doesn't have the most impressive production profile on the planet. But program size is not an input in my running back model. It doesn't seem to matter nearly as much as it does at wide receiver. And then on top of that, Strong ran a 4.37 40. That was tied for the fastest among all running backs at the combine. So a smaller school player with an average production profile, a strong speed score and 40-yard dash time, who's likely to go on day 3. You know who that reminds me of? It reminds me of his top comparable in my prospect model, Elijah Mitchell. Now clearly with any sort of comp, you're just looking at range of outcomes. Having a singular comp doesn't actually do you that much good. Looking at the greater picture is what's important. And for Strong, his other top comps are Ty Johnson and Darrell Scott. So it's not like he's some lock to be really good. How I utilize comps is that I just want to see if there have been hits in the past with a particular profile. I want to see a possible range of outcomes by looking at history. And having Elijah Mitchell there is great for Strong. It would be pretty cool if he landed in Miami with Mike McDaniel, given his ties to Elijah Mitchell. Now, staying with the theme of winners, let's move to wide receiver, where I've got 4 of them that I want to call out. Sky Moore, folks. Sky Moore. My model has been in love with Moore ever since he was inputted. It was just that projected draft capital was not allowing him to hit that 80th percentile mark, which is where hit rates really start to get bigger within the model. According to NFL Mock Draft Database, Sky Moore's projected draft capital just keeps getting better and better. It was well past pick 100 just a month ago, and now it's at 67th overall. And my model has Sky Moore as a result as an 82nd percentile wide receiver. He came in weighing 195 pounds at the combine at 5'10", so he has a good BMI. Not that it matters as much at wide receiver, but it still does in my model to some degree. And then he ran a 4.41 40 at that height and weight. He had a pretty good height and weight adjusted 40 time. Now, Sky Moore does compare to Andy Isabella in my model. That's not great. But he also compares favorably to DJ Moore and Jarvis Landry. On the prospect front, he's almost like a worse version of DJ Moore. But there are a lot of similarities there analytically. So he's someone that I will have a lot of this year. Another wide receiver winner is another smaller school guy, and that's Christian Watson. For having played at North Dakota State, Watson doesn't have the best production profile in the world. He definitely gets knocked for that in my model, and he gets knocked for the school that he's coming from. But I recognize the upside 100%. He's 6'4", 208 pounds, and you're in a 4.36 40. Again, that speed does not get inputted into my prospect model at wide receiver. But there's a chance that it's not getting much signal because draft capital already captures it. A team is going to see this physical specimen and say, I want this guy on my team. Watson still ranks under the 80th percentile in my model, but he has a pretty good top comp in DJ Chark. He had a great week in Indy. And so did Calvin Austin. When you're a smaller guy like Austin is, you need to be athletic to make up for it. It's almost a necessity. And Austin is exactly that. He ran a 4.3 240 and he crushed other workouts as well. But he's 5'8" and 170 pounds. He's another Memphis player who looks great athletically, but a lot of the guys from Memphis who have mostly been running backs in recent years, they have more size. If Austin rises up rookie draft boards, I probably won't be that into him. His production profile is not special. That's what we have to lead with. And his top comparable is actually Tavon Austin in my model. But he does compare favorably to KJ Hamler too. But I don't think he's going to get the same kind of draft capital as Hamler did. Austin's currently projected to go at 126 overall. There's no doubt he's electric. There's no doubt in my mind that he can play an interesting role in the NFL. But these types of players aren't always the best fantasy assets. And remember, I'm trying to solve the fantasy football equation. And then lastly for our winners is Alec Pierce. I think Pierce is going to be a really interesting evaluation for the fantasy community. On one hand, he's really athletically gifted. He's 6'3", 211 pounds, and he had a 95th percentile height-adjusted speed score at the combine. That size and athleticism is going to get people excited. On the other hand, his production profile is not very good. He had a decent breakout age, but he has below average marks in all three main production metrics in the model. I can see a path to upside because sometimes athleticism does translate for players. But he comps to someone like Chris Conley. We've seen this type of player before. It's not necessarily someone to go all in on unless his cost is super low. And I'm not sure that's going to be the case because there are a lot of people out there who love big and athletic wide receivers. So those are my big winners. Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, James Cook, Rashad White, Pierre Strong, Sky Moore, Christian Watson, Calvin Austin, and Alec Pierce. Let's move on to the harder part of the show, the losers. Like I said, I only have 3 of them this year, which tells us that this class tested and did well. My only running back loser is a player who I think was the biggest loser for fantasy purposes at the entire NFL Combine, and that's Kyren Williams. I was watching the Combine live when the running backs were doing their 40s. Kyren Williams' first unofficial 40 clocked in at 4.72. I couldn't even comprehend what I was seeing. I mean, I didn't think that Williams was going to be some incredible straight line runner, but he weighed in at just 194 pounds. Running a 4.72 at 194 pounds is really bad. And then his second 40 happens. Unofficial 4.7 flat. Still very bad. Now, fortunately, his official time was 4.65. Unfortunately, that gave Williams the worst speed score of the class. And it's a speed score that's well under the 90 threshold that my model looks for. So what does this all mean? Well, here's my stance. The allure with Williams was that he was a shifty back who was a really strong pass catcher in college. He had a 15% best season reception share. My model had him over the 80th percentile mark pre-combine, given his production and his projected draft capital. He was the model's like RB4 or RB5. I don't remember exactly where he was. He's now a 69th percentile running back in the model. And that's with top 100 draft capital, which may not be a lock anymore because of his combine performance. We just don't see players with his profile work out very often at all. The best outcome for a player in my model with a speed score that low and with a similar profile in terms of reception share and size is Theo Riddick, another Notre Dame running back. And here's the other thing. This running back class has a good number of pass catchers who tested far better than Kyren Williams did. And they're similar size too. Like Tyler Beatty. Tyler Beatty had better collegiate production, has similar size and a better BMI, and he tested better. We don't have the same athleticism concerns. And maybe these aren't athleticism concerns for Kyren Williams because after all, it's just straight line speed. But you also have to wonder about things like preparation. Like Williams came in at just 194 pounds, and he had to have had a general idea of what his 40 time would be like, right? Maybe Williams runs extremely fast at his pro day. I don't know. It's just tough to see a path to where I'll be really into him given what we've seen historically with his kind of profile. Now, 2 wide receivers I really liked pre-combine. I'm still cool with post-combine, but they're David Bell and Wan'Dale Robinson. They're both combine losers. Let's start with Wan'Dale, because his reasoning is pretty simple. We didn't know exactly how tall he was. There were pictures on the internet of him that showed that he might be really short, but he was listed at 5'11", 5'10" in college. Clearly, we've seen plenty of wide receiver hits at that height. but he came in at 5'8". At the very least, people, this is a red flag. I think in terms of probability with this stuff. Does a single inch matter in the grand scheme of things? No, not really. I'm sure there's some sort of joke that I could tell here too. And we've even seen some wide receiver hits at 5'9". A player I was into just last year, Elijah Moore, he's 5'9". But we haven't had a significant hit at 5'8". Some will point to Tyreek Hill, but his was a pro day measurement. His NFL measurement is a lot bigger than that. So maybe Tyreek Hill's a hit at 5'8". But we also know that objectively, Tyreek Hill is a crazy outlier. This 5'8" height is a concern. I almost view this similarly to how I view smaller running backs. I don't think the player is incapable of being productive in the NFL. I just worry about what a coaching staff thinks and how a coaching staff might deploy that player. That's the concern for Robinson at this point. I'm sort of in a wait and see mode with him. I want to see how the market adjusts before I say that I'll be drafting him or avoiding him. But I do know that this height, it brings more concerns to his profile. That's why he's a combine loser. And then lastly, there's David Bell. I'll say it again, my wide receiver model does not care about athletic testing. So David Bell's poor testing across the board doesn't change anything in my model. It may change his draft capital though, and that's the main worry. But it's not like we've never seen good players with David Bell's profile. I did mention a couple of weeks ago on the show that I wanted to see how he tested athletically. Because then a Chris Godwin comp could have been very, very real. But Bell weighed in at 212 pounds last week. That was heavier than his listed weight in college. That gave him slightly different comps in my model. And right now in my model, his top comp is Devontae Adams. They have very similar profiles, with Adams just being slightly better. And again, I know when people hear that, they say David Bell is not Devontae Adams. Of course he's not Devontae Adams. That's not what comps are there for. They're there to help you see if there's a true path to relevancy for the player that you're analyzing. Bell's second best comp in the model is Devier Posey. So it's not like things are just butterflies and rainbows. But I've seen people comp him to even Keenan Allen, who also didn't have the best measurables. It may impact draft capital, but the lack of athleticism from Bell, it honestly makes me somewhat excited. Because now there might end up being a discount. We'll just have to wait and see. But overall, this could realistically impact his draft capital, which is why he's a combine loser. He's just not a loser within my model. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll catch you on Friday with the Mailbag Show.